This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And make sure to order Jamie Glazov's new critically acclaimed jihadist psychopath, how he is charming, seducing, and devouring us. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Al-Baghdadi given Islamic burial rites. Wait a minute. Didn't everyone agree that ISIS has nothing to do with Islam? With us this evening to discuss this issue backed by popular demand, Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch and the author of the new book, The Palestinian Delusion, The Catastrophic History of the Middle East Peace Process. Robert, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Great to see you, Jamie. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, and how are you?
Just great, thank you.
Thank you. Were you celebrating what happened to Baghdadi?
Well, it's an act of war. We're at war. They have repeatedly declared, the Islamic State, that is, that they're at war with the United States. So I certainly see it as a positive development and something that is all to the good. No doubt about that.
I think a lot of leftists were sobbing and with inconsolable grief.
Well, they hate Trump so much, Jamie, that anybody who is against Trump, they're for. And so we had the ridiculous spectacle of the Washington Post writing admiringly of al-Baghdadi, calling him an austere religious scholar. And of course, they went off narrative in saying that. As you have pointed out, for years, the Post and everybody else in the establishment media has insisted that ISIS has nothing whatsoever to do with Islam. Barack Obama said this. Many, many other Western non-Muslim leaders said this. And yet now he's an austere religious scholar, according to the Washington Post. And you got to wonder, do they realize that in saying that, they have contradicted themselves and admitted what we have maintained all these years as fact, that he really is Islamic, that Islamic terrorism has a basis in Islamic teaching. And we've been excoriated for saying this. Now I hope that the Washington Post and all the rest of them will line up with apologies for calling us racists and bigots and Islamophobes all these years for pointing out this rather obvious truth. Absolutely,
Robert. It's interesting that the Post got caught in its own way and then changed the title, right?
Yes. Clearly, many people were ridiculing them for this. Probably some people were pointing out their inconsistency in this. I wouldn't be surprised if Islamic advocacy groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations or some others contacted them. I don't have any knowledge of this directly, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least that they said, hey, you're getting off the narrative. You got to get back on the reservation. You cannot suggest that this man has anything to do with Islam.
Thank you, Robert. It's just incredible to sit back and think of the sickness, pathology of the left. Because when we think about it, what you're saying here, so for years, they're saying Islam is a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of peace. It has nothing to do with ISIS. It has nothing to do with ISIS or with terrorism. But at the same time, they hate America and Trump so much that when an enemy of America is killed, they have to say good things about him. So Baghdadi's killed, and he's just a really good Islamic scholar. He was a good Islamic scholar, but he had nothing to do with Islam. It just pathological.
Absolutely. It shows the craziness of the world we're living in. And then it's compounded, of course, when al-Baghdadi is given Islamic burial rites. I'm sure that this, I don't know, maybe Trump ordered this. If he did, it was in line with what Obama did with Osama bin Laden. I rather suspect, however, that the order to do this came from somebody in the military or in the State Department, and they think that it is showing respect to the terror leader that will make the terrorists go easy on us. In the first place, that's astonishingly naive. It's not as if they're going to attack us with more virulence because al-Baghdadi would not have, if he had not been given Islamic burial rites. They already were at war with us. They already hated us, and they hate us more now. Maybe it hardly makes a difference. But the thing about it is, you can just imagine what the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and all the rest of them would be saying if al-Baghdadi had been buried without the Islamic rites. It would have been another terrible Islamophobic offense of the president, and it would have been another egregious misstep in the war against the global jihad, the defense against the global jihad, and he would have been excoriated all over the place for not giving him the Islamic burial rites by, here again, yet again, the same people who insist that ISIS has nothing to do with Islam.
Such a sick charade, circle, pathology. Another thing here, well, many things, but just outrageous that we live in a society, Robert, where this is actually not discussed. There's nothing in the establishment media about what you and I are talking about. CNN, MSNBC, any of the cable news networks, maybe even Fox News a little bit, but I'm not even sure there. Nobody is calling this out. And here's another thing that they're not calling out. You would think that we have been lectured so much by CARE, by ISNA, by all these Muslim Brotherhood front groups, by all the interfaith outreachers, if you want to call them that, by all the moderate Muslims and all this stuff. We've been lectured by them about all this stuff too. Where are the masses of Muslims demonstrating in the streets in a rage that Baghdadi was given these Islamic rites, buried at sea, and where are they screaming how this has given a bad name to their religion?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And the answer, of course, is nowhere. There haven't been any protests. Nobody has said a thing. Obviously, it seems entirely reasonable to surmise that CARE and ISNA and the other Muslim Brotherhood groups in the United States are happy that al-Baghdadi was given the Islamic burial rites. And here again, it's revelatory. We saw demonstrations of hundreds of thousands, no exaggeration, hundreds of thousands of Muslims against cartoons of Muhammad. We saw demonstrations for years against cartoons of Muhammad in many, many Muslim countries. And yet nobody seems to notice or care that while Islamic advocacy groups in the West routinely claim that Islam has nothing to do with terrorism and that the vast majority of Muslims condemn the terrorists and that the terrorists have twisted and hijacked Islam and all of that, nobody seems to notice that there have never been any comparable demonstrations, any demonstrations of remotely the same size of Muslims against terrorism. I actually kept track of these over the years at Jihad Watch because there have been some that have been announced with tremendous fanfare. About 10 or 12 years ago, there was a group, Muslims Against Terrorism. And the fellow got massive, Kamal Nawash was his name, and he got massive international publicity for his upcoming march. This is back in 2006 or 7, I believe, his march against terrorism, of Muslims against terrorism. And when the day finally came for this march, the reporters and the non-Muslims far outnumbered the Muslims who were there, who were probably about 25 people. And other Muslims against terrorism marches, different organizations organized by different people, but the same principle, Muslims standing up against jihad terrorism. In Toronto and other places in North America, they have gotten the same kind of turnout. Hardly any Muslims show up. Far more non-Muslims show up. It's the same thing that we see with moderate Muslim leaders. They have far more non-Muslim followers than they do Muslim followers. And the uncomfortable answer that nobody wants to admit, nobody wants to acknowledge as to why this is is that Islamic doctrine does indeed teach warfare against unbelievers, and Muslims who stand against that are not basing what they're doing on any traditional understanding of the Quran or Islam in general.
Thank you, Robert. Well, look, during the Obama administration, as you pointed out in your fine article on this, and not just fine, but as always, brilliant and profound pieces at Front Page Magazine. Thank you so much for that. You pointed out how during the Obama administration, of course, this constant theme of how ISIS doesn't operate in the name of any religion. And the Obama State Department spokesperson Marie Harf was always saying this, right? What did you think of how Marie Harf always went on about this stuff? And especially, I remember one time it just became infamous, how she was referring to how these people just need jobs.
Yes, that's right. And yet, you know, it's silly, it's ridiculous, and we can laugh about it. But this is actually the policy of the United States government to a great degree to this day. Because what was underlying what Marie Harf said in that case was the assumption that because Islam is a religion of peace, because Islam has nothing to do with terrorism, which they were taking for granted, there has to be some other explanation for why some Muslims become jihad terrorists. And the explanation that they fastened upon was that it's all about poverty and lack of economic advantage. Yeah. And thus, if we just give these people money, then they won't become terrorists. Now, nothing could have been more counterproductive, because the fact is poverty doesn't cause terrorism. Many studies have shown this over the years. Some of the richest men in the world, Osama bin Laden among them, became jihad terrorists. Zawahiri, who succeeded Osama as the leader of Al-Qaeda, is quite wealthy. Many others have been quite wealthy. The Islamic State as a whole is extremely wealthy, even to this day, after it's lost its holdings in Iraq and Syria. And if poverty caused terrorism, then they would lay down their arms now that they've made a lot of money. But the fact is that this idea, this false notion that poverty causes terrorism, actually leads to egregious policy errors, because we end up showering money on states like Pakistan where the government has been implicated multiple times in aiding terrorist activity, and they turn around and use our money to giving it to jihad terrorists. So we end up, in trying to stop terrorism, actually financing it ourselves.
Yeah, it's incredible what Stockholm Syndrome does to people and all the branches of dysfunctionality that grow out of it. I don't think Baghdadi was an example of somebody that came from the world of impoverishment and the downtrodden, right?
No, not at all. And many other terrorists around the world have been from quite wealthy backgrounds. There was a plot, you may recall, a few years ago in Glasgow of a bunch of Muslim doctors who were going to blow up the airport there. Doctors, of course, all around the world are quite well off, and they were not the only doctors. There were quite a few doctors who traveled from the West, from various Western countries, to the Islamic State to become medics there. And the idea that poverty causes terrorism just has no foundation in reality, but it does lead to a great deal of waste of American taxpayer money.
Scary. Robert Spencer, thank you for joining the Glazov Gang. Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much. Please remember, ladies and gentlemen, we're a fan-generated program. Go to jamieglazov.com to support our show. And make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. And make sure you're visiting Robert Spencer's Jihad Watch. We'll see you soon. Good night.